You want to write the text. Okay. In any case, you're not being recorded, so, but then you have to behave. The video is this way, not that way. So I gave you a list of stylistic features that we need to look at as far as the African novel is concerned. I want you to add humor to that list. Add humor to the list. Add humor to the list. Humor, right? Do you even have it in your notes? Humor. Add contrasts. Add contrasts. Contrasts. Add analogy. Add analogy. Okay, so let's start with the first one. What was that? Flashback. Flashback is a narrative technique through which the writer recalls past events in order to shed light on present circumstances. Flashback can be defined as a narrative technique through which the writer recalls past events in order to explain or shed light on current occurrences in the work. That's flashback. So if you've been seeing Nigerian movies, you will have experienced the use of flashback. Okay? The camera, somebody will just say, oh, it happened a long time ago. And there will be a close-up shot on the person's face, and then it is dissolved into the past event, right? So that is flashback. The authors can use it in the novel as well. So you check when you are reading a novel, you pay attention when you want to, because when you want to discuss the narrative techniques which are part of the stylistic features of the novel in literary style, you might need to talk about these things. Okay, you need to talk about flashback. What's the next one? Foreshadowing. Another name for foreshadowing is prefigurement. Another name for foreshadowing is prefigurement. Prefigurement. Right? Are we still doing election? Prefigurement. Foreshadowing. Foreshadowing can be defined as a narrative technique deployed by the writer to point to future directions. To point to future directions in the work, in the novel, in the text. It can be a word, it can be an event that points to future occurrences in the novel. foreshadowing is a narrative technique. It can also be called prefigurement, which gives us future direction about the world. It can be a word, it can be an expression, it can be an event which points to future occurrences in the work. For instance, if you read Richard Wright's Native Son, at the initial stage of the novel, Bigger is seen chasing a rat in the mother's bedroom, which he kills. That event prefigures how Bigger himself will be hunted down by white people in white society. So any event, any word, any expression, anything that points to future occurrences in the work is what we call foreshadowing. So if you read Unexpected Joy at Dawn, or you're reading Unexpected Joy at Dawn at the moment, you might want to think and consider if you've come across an instance of foreshadowing. What's the next one? Suspense. This is another narrative technique. This is another narrative technique. Seen in terms of how the author withholds important information from the reader. Seen in terms of how the author withholds important information from the reader, so as to sustain the reader's interest in the work. So as to sustain the reader's interest in the work. Suspense refers to the narrative technique in which the author withholds important information from the reader so as to sustain the reader's interest in the work. The author does not want to give you everything. You know that something is supposed to happen next, but he withholds that information from you so that you want to read more, continue reading the work. So I hardly think of a novel that does not use suspense. But if you are asked to explain the use of suspense in a work of art, you should be able to do that by telling us which information has been withheld at a particular point in the novel. Right? We know the reason. The reason is to encourage us to keep reading. But sometimes reading can be boring. But with suspense, you want to discover more, you want to read more. So it sustains the reader's interest. It creates in the reader the necessary longing to finish the book. All right? Apart from creating anxiety to know what will happen later. What's the next one? Irony. Okay. In some places, they will say irony. In some places. Right? So, a narrative trope. Irony is a narrative trope in which meanings are communicated through the opposite of what is said and done. Irony is a narrative trope in which meanings are communicated through what is said, through the opposite of what is said and done. Right? We have a number of types of irony. We have verbal irony. We have dramatic irony. We have situational irony. And we have structural irony. When you are talking about irony, you should be able to specify which one applies. Okay? Verbal irony is seen in terms of the opposite of what the character has said or what a person has said. Verbal irony is an expression which means the exact opposite of what has been said. Okay? For instance, if I had said, Karen was early to class today, that would be verbal irony. Because actually I mean that she was late. Right? And dramatic irony can be defined as a type of irony in which the characters or a character is unaware of the significance of their actions or the import of the actions or the cause of an event in a work of art, but the audience knows. The reader understands what is going on, but the characters themselves are in the dark. That's dramatic irony. They take actions without knowing the import of the action, but the audience or the reader knows. Dramatic irony is a type of irony in which characters act without understanding the significance of the action, but the audience knows. All right? For instance, if someone says, somebody's going to meet someone, but she thinks that that person is a savior, a good person, without knowing that the person probably is a kidnapper or a murderer and all of that. If the audience knows, but the character in question does not know, that's dramatic irony. Okay? Dramatic irony exists in most novels that you read. Right? So even in Unexpected Joy at Dawn, you see dramatic irony, but I'm not going to state it because you are supposed to discover that yourself. It is normally a dramatic technique, but it can be deployed in the novel as well. Okay? It can be deployed in the novel. So you take note of that. What's the next one? Okay, we'll not talk about situational irony. Okay, let's talk about situational irony. Situational irony. Situational irony is an action. It defines an action. It's used to define an action that brings about an unintended result or outcome. an action that brings about an unintended result or outcome. Situational irony brings about an unintended result or outcome. You take an action, or a character takes an action, hoping that this is going to be the result, but the opposite happens. When that happens, you are in the realm of situational irony. These are the things that make literature beautiful and interesting. All right? You can find that in Tom and Jerry. Yes. Tom and Jerry a lot. Tom would want to take an action. He might just bring a rake and keep here. His intention is that when Jerry runs, all right, you come and step on that rake, and the rake will hit Jerry. But immediately after that, Tom himself will forget that he placed something in that place, and then will be the one to run into it, all right? And Jerry will be somewhere laughing at him. So the very trap that he set for Jerry, right, has now caught him. So he intended that action to bring a different outcome, but the outcome is opposite of what he intended. That's situational irony. Okay? What is that? What's the matter? And then you have structural irony. You have structural irony. Structural irony. Structural irony is built into the narrative structure of the work. Structural irony is built into the narrative structure of the work. All right? Structural irony is built into the narrative structure of the work. It is usually seen in how the narrator narrates the story against himself or herself because of his or her naivety. Because of his or her naivety. Naivety. Because the character is naive. The narrator is naive. All right? And so tells the story against himself or herself. That's structural irony. It's built into the narrative structure of the work itself. And it is usually brought about by the naive narrator. By the what? Naive narrator. Okay? N-A-I-V-E. All right? Who tells the story against himself or herself? So that she understands the story differently from how the reader understands the story. You can find this in Chimamanda Adichie's Purple Hibiscus. You can find structural irony in Chimamanda Adichie's Purple Hibiscus. How many of you have read that? No. You've read. Good. So if you've not read Purple Hibiscus, you should try and do that before you graduate, right? Good. Because in Purple Hibiscus, we have a naive narrator in the person of Camberley, right? She's a young girl who sees her father as a hero, all right? An epitome of success. But the audience knows that the father is an abuser, okay? He's a dictator at the level of the family, okay? He beats the wife, he's cruel to the children, but Camberley sees him as a saint, a good man, because even the beating is meant for their own good, for the good of the children and the family. It's the way to correct them and make them walk in the way of the Lord. Right? So that is structural irony. So what's the next one? Illusion, right? It didn't say illusion, it said allusion. Illusion. Allusion. Allusion can be defined as a brief reference. Allusion can be defined as a brief reference. Allusion can be defined as a brief reference that's made in a text. We have classical allusion. We have classical allusion. Classical allusion. Classical allusion. We have biblical allusion. We have historical allusion. And we have literary allusion. Classical allusion happens when the writer alludes to events in the Greco-Roman world. Classical allusion occurs when the writer alludes to events in the Greco-Roman world. Greco-Roman world. I hope you know how to spell Greco-Roman. If you don't want to take it that way, you can say alludes when the writer alludes to the world of the Greeks and the Romans. Right? Otherwise, you say Greco-Roman. Roman world. So, if you are reading a contemporary text and you come across names like Achilles, Hector, Venus, Athena, okay, Poseidon, and so on and so forth. That is classical allusion. Homer, Virgil, or any events that happen in that time. Because the writer is being creative, wants to briefly reference those events to connect meaning to contemporary time. Right? That would be classical allusion. That's why you need to know most of the popular events that happen in the Greco-Roman world and literature, so that you'll be able to name the strategy, the technique that the author is using when you find it in poetry, drama, or prose. When you discuss literature in terms of all these things we are saying, your work will be technical, will be technically sound, will be professional. Because literature is not necessarily telling us the stories. Everybody knows the story. If you're going to be a critic of literature, you need to be armed with all these terms so that you can deploy them when it is served. Right? You finish reading a text and they say discuss the techniques. You're going to tell us if we have foreshadowing, we have suspense, we have allusion. You discuss them. That's what makes you a student of literature. Right? Then biblical allusion occurs when the author makes reference to events in the Bible. Persons, characters in the Bible, events in the Bible. When the author makes reference to events in the Bible, that is biblical allusion. That's biblical allusion. When the author makes reference to events in history, that is historical allusion. author makes reference to events in history, that is historical allusion. And when the author makes reference to other literary texts, other literary works, that is literary allusion. So you should be able to discuss these levels of allusion when you are reading the work and they apply. Okay? And the author makes reference to events in other works of literature, that is literary allusion. So allusion is a brief reference that is made in a text and can be discussed under classical, biblical, historical, and literary allusion. What's the next one? So I didn't get that. I don't understand. Allegory, all right? Allegory, right? Allegory. An allegory can be defined as a work of art that has two levels of interpretation, two levels of meaning. An allegory can be defined as a work of art that has two levels of interpretation, or two levels of meaning. The first level is the surface meaning. The first level of meaning is the surface meaning. The first level of meaning is the surface meaning. The first level of meaning is the surface meaning. Surface. Surface meaning. Surface. Surface meaning. Surface. Right? Surface meaning. Right? And then you have the deep meaning. The deep meaning. It is a narrative technique. It is a narrative technique in which the author hides the real meaning of the text in a deeper or at a deeper level of meaning, so that it will only be understood by those who can reason beyond the surface meaning. Some allegorical works can be read by children and adults. The children will read it for the surface meaning, the adults will read it for the deep meaning. Right? So, for instance, if you come across stories that make use of animal characters, all right? Animal characters. Like Animal Farm by George Orwell. Animal Farm by George Orwell. It's an allegory. All right? It's an allegory on the evil of certain political system or economic system, like communism, but you only see animals. You don't see animals acting in the farm without knowing that they're actually talking about the deeply political issue. So writers use allegory to escape censure. To escape what? Censorship. Writers use allegory to escape censorship. All right? For instance, a writer wants to write about Buhari, but he uses the village head or a particular village, right? Who came to, immediately he came to power, immediately he's installed as a village head, things start going bad, people are kidnapped in the village, all right? There's no security anywhere, all right? The village head is not always in the village, he's always traveling to another village. All right? So, there's no way Buhari will come and tell him, why are you writing about me? But we all know. So Buhari said he was like, did I call your name? Are you a village head? Are you not the president? All right? So, that's how allegory works. It helps authors to escape censorship in part, apart from encouraging creativity, making the story to be understood in more than one move. Okay, the next one. Symbolism. Symbolism refers to the use of symbols in works of literature. Use of symbols in works of literature. Symbolism refers to the use of symbols in literature. Symbols are signs. Symbols are signs that point to other signs as their meaning. Symbols don't have meanings in themselves, but in what they point us to. The meaning lies outside the symbol. Symbols are signs that point to other signs as their meaning. All right? All right? How many of you are symbols? How many of you are symbols? Somebody says to you and says, "This is this. You are a symbol of the Christian faith." Right? Because when the person sees you, you have become a sign, a signifier that points to something else. All right? Okay? So symbols are like words. Symbols have all the characteristics of words. Symbols are like words. They can be understood in context. They can be understood in what? Context. Because words are usually understood in context, right? So symbols are also understood in context. What constitutes a particular symbol in one context might be a different symbol in a different context. So, like words, the meaning of symbols shifts depending on the context. The context of, when we say the context, we mean the context of situation. The context of situation. The context in which the word is used. All right? So, a mountain can be a barrier. All right? A mountain can act as a barrier, can mean a barrier. A mountain can also refer to a high place, elevation, or being close to God. It depends on the context. The cross, when placed on a building, can mean Christianity or a church. When the cross is placed on a building, it means the symbol of Christianity or a church. But then the cross can also be a symbol of suffering. The cross can also be a symbol of suffering. Like I cannot carry this cross anymore. Symbol of suffering. So it depends on the context. Symbols are also culturally determined. 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 That means what constitutes a symbol in one culture, when you move to another culture, might be a different thing entirely. All right? So symbols are culturally determined. Take an owl, for instance. Take the owl, for instance. The owl is spelled O-W-L. Take the owl, for instance. Okay? If the owl hoots in Europe right now, if the owl hoots in Europe, you know that the owl hoots, right? And so if the owl hoots in Europe right now, a typical European will say, oh, what a beautiful night. Nature is beautiful tonight. All right? I'm listening to the sound of nature. All right? But let the owl hoot in Nigeria at night, close to midnight or after midnight. All right? And you begin to hear, I bind you in the name of Jesus, I cast you, you know. You will not succeed in this neighborhood, forever sent you. All right? Because in our cultural environment, the owl is a witch or a wizard. All right? Going for operation. That night. Okay? But we do know that the owl is a nocturnal animal, right? So there's no other time for it to come out and hoot other in the night. So chill, right? Chill. Next time you hear the owl, chill. It's not your uncle, right? It's not your uncle. Neither is it that person that has said that you will not graduate, you will not succeed. Okay? So we hope that next time when you hear the owl, you say like a European that the night is beautiful. All right? Instead of cringing in fear. All right? Some people cannot even pray. So some people will now cover themselves. All right? And hide. And so that is it. When you see a symbol in a work of literature, don't be afraid to assign meaning to it, depending on the context of the story. As a student of literature, you should be able to know what that symbol means within the context of the story, and within the context of the culture, the cultural context. Because a symbol will not mean one thing for everyone, just like the word. So don't be afraid to assign meaning, but let it be intelligent meaning. The next one. Motif. Motif. M-O-T-I-F. Motif. Motif can be defined as an idea, a symbol, or a sign. An idea, a symbol, or a sign that is recurrent in a work of art. An idea, a symbol, or a sign that is recurrent, that recurs, and is recurrent in a work of art. As recurrent in a work of art. Sometimes you come across people using the word theme and motif. The difference is that the motif recurs, all right? Theme is just a central idea in the work, but motif recurs. Motif at the level of idea is one that is recurrent in the work of art. So motif usually serves as a narrative strategy, which qualifies it as a stylistic gesture. We are looking at the stylistic feature, a literary style. Looking at literary style, looking at motif. You need to understand that anything that recurs, any idea that recurs, any sign that recurs in the work of art is a motif. A very important, a very popular motif in literature is the quest motif or the journey motif. The quest motif or the journey motif. The quest motif or the journey motif. This motif is when the work of art is characterized by going on a journey looking for something, right? Going on a journey or looking for something. So you can read the novel from the beginning to the end, you see that it's all about a journey, questing, looking for something, a search. Or whatever the writer, the characters are looking for. The next one. You don't have the same version? Mood and tone, right? Okay. This is another important stylistic feature. It can be taught in a whole class, right? And I think in the course of this lecture, I had defined it right. So, but let's do it again as a way of helping the less privileged members of society, right? Okay, we don't have less privilege. Eh? Okay, let's leave it then. So we don't have less privilege. Tone can be defined as tone can be defined as the attitude of the speaker, the writer, towards the subject matter of the work. Usually inferred through diction. Usually inferred through diction. Usually inferred through diction. Usually inferred through diction. Tone can be defined as the attitude of the speaker or the writer towards the subject matter of the work. Usually inferred through what? Through diction. So to determine the tone of a work, you have to pay attention to the choice of words of the writer. To determine the tone of the work of art, you have to pay attention to the writer's choice of words. In fact, any given interpretation of literature begins with diction. You need to know the words. You need to know the words. Right? When you know the word, you'll be set free. Right? But the word has power, deliverance. Okay? interpretation begins with diction. Interpretation begins at the level of the word. And one way of knowing what a work means is to know the writer's attitude towards it. Is the writer indifferent? Is the writer excited? Is the writer melancholy? Right? And from tone, you can then understand the mood of the work. The mood of the work refers to the atmosphere, the general atmosphere of the work, which is usually determined through tone. Mood refers to the general atmosphere, the overall atmosphere of the work determined through tone. So we use diction to determine tone, then we use tone to determine mood, right? The next one. Is that all? Humor. When I said you should add humor, you're not yet in class. So, humor. Humor is a narrative device through which humor is a narrative device through which the writer, humor is a narrative device through which the writer creates laughter. In literature, it would be so bad to read the work from the beginning to the end. You don't smile, you don't laugh, you don't find anything fun about it, because literature is supposed to entertain. And humor is one of the devices deployed by authors to bring about that entertainment. Right? So you should expect some funny moments in the work, either through what the writer says, either through what the writer narrates, or what characters say, or through situations that the characters are made to participate in. Right? You need to note that. And it is a narrative technique. Humor is a narrative technique. So if somebody asks you, discuss at least 3 narrative techniques from this text, humor should be one of them. Right? Humor can happen. Is there any problem? Any problem? Humor can happen even in tragedy, even in tragic circumstances. You can have humor even in tragic situations. Right? We call such humor dark humor. What do we call them? Dark humor. What do we call them? Dark humor. Dark humor. Not dark humor. Dark humor. Dark humor. Right? We call them dark humor. Alright? Dark humor can be defined as a type of humor that is used in tragic or sad circumstances. Used in tragic or sad circumstances. Okay, are you going to assume? I'm going to assume. Okay. All right. So, in serious, solemn, tragic situations, the author could still find a space to make us laugh. All right? So, in such situations, such humor is called dark humor. Dark humor. Dark. So, note that. It's different from comic relief. Comic relief is specific to drama. tragedy in drama, right? Which is a scene, right? In the midst of tragedy, in the midst of the tragic drama, the dramatist creates a scene where you have clowns make the audience to relieve tension as comic relief. But dark humor is the type of humor in which you laugh even in the midst of sad situations, right? It can happen it happens all the time. Something sad has happened, but you don't see it as so sad. You are laughing. Maybe somebody has fallen, and you're laughing, and your friend says it's not funny. It's not funny, and you laugh the more. All right. So literature is life. Literature captures all the moments of life, no matter how minute. So what's the next one? What's the next one? Contrast. 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 Sometimes you come across contrast in a novel, but you don't know that you are supposed to call it contrast. Okay? So contrast is a narrative technique deployed by the writer to state differences. To state differences. It could be differences between persons or differences between events and situations. Differences between persons, or differences between events and situations. What's the next one? Analogy. Analogy is usually achieved through comparison. It can become a narrative technique when it is recurrent in a work of art. Analogy is achieved through comparison. It can become a narrative technique if the whole work can be seen in terms of analogy, in terms of comparison. The author is in the habit of comparing. For instance, the author can draw analogy between the lives of blacks and white people in a society, right? As an analogy. Analogy exists at the level of similarities and differences. Analogy exists at the level of similarities and differences. One way of knowing that the author has deployed analogy in a work of art is if there's a preponderance of similes and metaphors in the work. So when you're reading a novel, pay attention. I want you two guys to be sound critics of literature, right? If the author has deployed many instances of similes and metaphors, you are likely to have analogy as a major narrative technique in the work. Take, for instance, Second Class Citizen by Buchi Imecheta. Our work deploys analogy because when you read it, you come across a lot of similes, comparison. The author is constantly comparing things. Second Class Citizen by Buchi Imecheta makes use of analogy a lot. Is that all for the sermon? Okay, so if that's all for the sermon, so we can have our tests. Can have our tests on okay, you want to have it now? we can have our test today week, right? We can have our test today week. We have our test today week. Today week. All right? 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 I hope you know what day it is. What day do we normally have the lecture? I don't usually want people to write tests after that they now continue with class. It's not sweet, right? It's not delicious. Like you write the test and then you go home. Nobody will cry in Jesus' name. And even if you cry, God will wipe your tears. Alright? So let us make it Friday, 7 a.m. at Tedford Hall. Where do you want to take the test? This, I know that this place you only have one fan turning, so you won't be comfortable. All right. So let's be Tedford. And then I don't want you guys to, I don't want anybody to trouble you. You know, this test of a thing, you don't need any distraction. People distracting you. All right. So please tell all your friends and family members, okay, those who are not here, that we'll have a test on Friday, 7. 7 is 7. Right? On the African novel 211. And the test will be based on unexpected joy at dawn. So you will not be surprised. So because you already know the questions, the text and everything, so it will not come as a surprise to you. Let us now move on to I can't find my color line. I think that would be pre-colonial. The pre-colonial experience in the African novel. The pre-colonial experience in the African novel. Where's my color line? Okay, I've seen it. The pre-colonial experience in the African novel. You'll find the novel portraying pre-colonial. Is there any problem? Novels portraying pre-colonial experience in Africa. the African novel terminates at 10. So we still have some moments to share together. All right? So by pre-colonial, we refer to the time before colonialism. By pre-colonial, we refer to the time before colonialism. Now, the colonial masters wanted the world to believe that Africa did not have history that predates colonialism. Colonial masters wanted the world to believe that Africa did not have a history that predated colonialism. As far as they were concerned, history began in Africa when they arrived in Africa, but that is a lie. That is not true. We had our own experience prior to the colonial encounter, right? Now, what you need to pay attention, because there is a certain level of technicality that's involved in the discussion of the pre-colonial experience in the African novel. Okay? And that is what I want you to understand. Why do we have to talk about the pre-colonial experience? We need to talk about our pre-colonial experience in order to illustrate to the world that, contrary to what the colonial masters said, Africa had its own culture and civilization, and that the colonial masters were not the ones who brought us culture and civilization. They only came to destroy our own culture and civilization. So you need to understand. All right? Actually, this class has been live on TikTok, so sometimes you might just not want to come to class, so you can just stay and listen through TikTok, right? So we are trying to make things easy for you. So that is what the pre-colonial experience is all about. It is necessary for us to investigate our own pre-colonial experience in order to counter the colonialist ideology and hegemony. It is necessary for us to investigate our pre-colonial experience in order for us to counter the colonialist ideology and hegemony. And the colonialist ideology is predicated on the idea that Africa did not have culture and civilization prior to colonialism. So, talking about our pre-colonial experience is to counter that narrative. Because most times, if you don't counter what people say about you, it might remain as the truth. Because life is all about what? Representation and narrative. Life is about representation, how you are presented again before people, again and again. Representation is representation. All right? So Africa has been represented, in fact, has been misrepresented to the world by the colonial masters as a place that is dark, a place that is full of primitivism and savagery, and that the colonial masters only came to deliver Africa from that savagery and primitivism. That has been the discourse out there. So they said we went there and we saw them. They were all naked. They didn't know themselves. They didn't have God. They didn't have religion. They didn't know their left from their right. And we started teaching them how to behave well, how to live, and so on and so forth. But that is a lie. We had our own culture and civilization before colonial masters came. So we need to change the historical narrative about Africa. There's need for us to change the historical narrative about Africa. Because at the end of the day, you must realize that Africa is actually the cradle of human civilization. We exported civilization to other parts of the world. And then they now came back and said that we were not civilized. What an irony. What a sad irony. Quite sad. Okay? Because it is on record that guys like Plato, Aristotle, learned in Africa, studied in Africa. So Western knowledge is an appropriation of African knowledge. All right? Some of the first universities that were built in the world were built in Africa. African technology was advanced when Europeans were living in caves. All right? But you know what happens? People could just destroy what you have and then write another story that's opposite of what you have. That is what the colonial masters did. And when you begin to believe those stories, you limit yourself psychologically. And when you limit yourself psychologically, you are enslaved forever. All right? Which is, if there's anything you have to protect about your life, it's the way you think, your mind. It has to be constantly renewed. All right? By constantly questioning what you know, reading to liberate yourself. Because once you're locked up in the mind, once you're boxed in, that is the end. All right? Whatever progress you ever make in life, whatever progress you ever make in life will depend on the level of your mental maturity. So the colonial masters attacked the African psyche with the ideology of colonialism. Colonial masters attacked the African psyche with the ideology of colonialism through slavery, right? Through humiliation, centuries upon centuries of humiliation, so that people come to look at themselves as people who must always be inferior, must always be down. Whereas if they know who they are, they will know that they actually began the world. They were the first set of people. Blacks were the first set of people in the world. So what the Europeans did was to just destroy, and in fact, we have evidence in certain parts of the world, blacks were completely exterminated, and then that place was filled with white people. And they don't only do this at the level of materialism, they do it at the level of the text. They destroy text and write other ones. They destroy a text and write another one that is opposite of what that destroyed text said. And they keep that one to be read by the next generation so that it will be believed. So you need to understand. In places like, where is Mercy from? Where is Mercy from? Argentina, right? Blacks were carefully destroyed. systematically destroyed. And today, Argentina is more or less a white place. All right? A place like Australia, the Aborigines, we call them Aborigines, the original people in a place, were black people. But the Europeans who relocated from England to that place systematically killed off the black population. And today the place is mostly white. If you see indigenous people, it's just few. And I'm saying that they not only do this, if they could do this with human beings, how much more with text? Okay? So most of the texts that you read and you're happy are texts that were edited just to front a particular ideology. Certain texts were removed, all right, even from your Bible, because its still narrative was to be promoted. And today, none of you has looked for those missing texts. But you carry this one. This one is the true word of God. You know? You don't ask about the ones that were removed. So that's why you are in the university, to question things, to know beyond what is presented to you. Because certain people want the world to be in a certain way, want to behave in a certain way. All right? And if you are not liberated mentally, you continue to behave the way they want you to behave. All right. So, that is why Achebe wrote an article entitled "The Novelist as Teacher." The Novelist as Teacher. In order to counter the debilitating consequences of colonial rule. Now, when you understand the import of colonialism on the mind, you understand why all these fights were necessary. All right? It is colonialism that makes black people to live the way they live in America today. People who are afraid, constantly afraid of being killed any moment because the white policeman feels that their life is not important. It's colonialism, right? It's colonialism that makes white people think that they can still sit in Europe and control whatever is happening in Africa. It's colonialism that makes most African leaders to always run to Europe to look for ideas on how to develop Africa. Please tell us what we are supposed to do. We are in inflation now. Tell us what we are supposed to do. Do you think they will tell you the truth? No. Or they will tell you something that will help you? No. They won't. It is colonialism that makes most African leaders believe that they cannot survive without taking loans from China, from America, and aids and grants, without knowing that those aids and loans and grants are things that continue to enslave the country. Because those aids and grants and loans have terms that sometimes most of them don't even understand. So that's why it is important to speak in such a way that we change our mentality, our psyche, about how we view ourselves, because centuries and centuries of colonial rule has made it such that the average African person comes to see himself as inferior. Whereas we still have in historical memory of a time when white people used to come to Africa to bow down to our kings. So Achebe emphasized the need to interrogate history in The Novelist as Teacher. So the novel then becomes a committed work of literature. You don't just write for fun anymore. There's a more important business to be done. The novel becomes a committed literature. literature of commitment. The novel also departs from the ideology of art for art's sake. The African novel has jettisoned the concept of art for art's sake. It is now a committed, in fact, it has always been. It was formulated as a committed literature. And what is a committed literature? A kind of literature that seeks to transform society, change society through education, through conscientization. Through education, through conscientization, through creating awareness, making the masses understand the chains that bind them, and helping them to know how to do what? Break those chains. That's what the novel is now. So the novel is a weapon. It's a militant instrument. It's a weapon of warfare. Weapon of historical warfare. It aims to counter colonial hegemony, colonial ideologies about Africa. And it begins with history. That's why we are talking about pre-colonial. The white man wanted to believe that you did not have history before colonialism, that your history started with slavery or colonialism. And so we have to counter it with studying our pre-colonial era. Centuries upon centuries where our forebears lived without interferences from foreign powers, in our culture and in our civilization. So that we can only see colonialism as a disruptive gesture. Something that intervened in our growth and development and destroyed our destiny forever and forever. That's how we're supposed to say. That's how we are supposed to say colonialism, right? And not as the beginning of our lives, of our history. So we have a pre-colonial history. So Achebe says that, in the Novelist as Teacher, Achebe says that it is important for us to look back. Important for us to look back and see where we went wrong, right? And where the rain began to beat us. The Novelist as Teacher. Achebe says that it's important for us to do what? To look back, begin to check where we went wrong and where the rain began to beat us. So in that statement, you could see that Achebe is simply saying that there was a time when things were going well with us on the continent until something tragic happened. So we need to understand that point of disruption, that point of rupture, which is colonialism. That is where things started to go wrong with Africa. Achebe illustrates the effect that colonialism has on the psyche with a story about a boy whose teacher asked him to write an essay on Harmattan. The teacher asked the boy together with other classmates to write a story about Harmattan. When the boy submits his paper, the teacher notices that the boy has written a story not on Harmattan, but on snow, on the snow, right? But on the snow. And when the teacher confronted the boy, why do you write on snow, on the snow, instead of Harmattan? The boy said that he was afraid that his classmate would laugh at him for writing about Harmattan, because Harmattan is African weather. So the snow is preferable because it is European weather. All right? So that's how that story illustrates the damage that colonialism has done to the dignity of the African side. So that there's something in racism that we call self-hatred. Somebody hates you to the point that you turn the hatred yourself on yourself. Right? That means you project the person's hatred on yourself. You don't like yourself again. Because this group of people don't like it. It's called self-hatred. That's what has happened to the African person. Centuries of being hated by white people has psychologically predisposed the black man to hate himself. And everything that has to do with him. So the Harmattan is not beautiful, it's the snow that is beautiful, because the snow is connected with white people. All right? There's nothing beautiful in the Nigerian landscape, but if they show something landscape in Europe, oh, it's very beautiful. All right? And so on and so forth. Those things are the psychological effects of colonialism. So it can be seen in that boy not wanting to write about Harmattan. He wants to write about snow. So Achebe says, and I quote, "I think it is my business as a writer to teach that boy." Achebe says, and I quote, "I think it is my business as a writer to teach that boy that there is nothing disgraceful about the African weather, that the palm tree is a fit subject for poetry. I think it is my duty as a writer to teach that boy that there is nothing disgraceful about the African weather, and that the palm tree is a fit subject for poetry," unquote. Achebe says in the novelist as teacher. So the novelist is not just someone who writes for fun. With post-colonial writers like Achebe, the novelist has an onerous task to do what? To educate, to teach the readers about that history and the need to appreciate that history. I think it is my duty, my business as what? Writer, to do what? To teach that boy that there's nothing disgraceful about the African way, and that the palm tree is a fit subject for poetry. You can write about your landscape. Your landscape is beautiful. In fact, the world desires to know about the African landscape right now. You should be proud of your culture. Go to your village, bathe in your stream, right? There are no witches and wizards there who will kill you, right? Those village streams and hills are beautiful setting for literature, right? And the world is waiting to see them when you describe them in your work, in your short stories. Because Africa is beautiful. But the racist ideology, racism wanted you to believe that there was nothing beautiful about you, including your landscape, including your climate. So you want to talk about snow, not the rain, not Harmattan. Not done. So instead of writing about the snow, you can definitely write about the rainfall. So you see most African writers, what they pick, what they choose to write on are our African objects, like our elephants, our lions, okay? Like one of these poems that talk about the licking room, right? In a riverine area, proud about the landscape. That's the counter ideology to colonialism. Accepting ourselves, our history, and everything about us, both the good and the bad. We have to embrace our story. It's quite important to do that. So Achebe, in most of his works, is interested in African history. Most of his work is interested in African history. From the pre-colonial period to the post-colonial period. From the pre-colonial period to the post-colonial period. And by writing about these historical events, Achebe hopes to change the psyche of the average African. Because remember this, nothing changes about the individual if the mind of the individual is not renewed. When the Bible says, through the renewal of your mind. So the mind is the seat of judgment. The mind is the engine room. And as I said, you have to guard it. Because it can stop you, it can also make you progress. Mind can stop you, also make you progress. So this is seen in this quote from Achebe. Take it down, word for word if you can. Here then is an adequate revolution for me to expound. Here then is an adequate revolution for me to expound. Here then is an adequate revolution for me to expound. Here then is an adequate revolution for me to do what? To espouse. ES. P-O-U-S-E, to espouse. ES. P-O-U-S-E, to espouse. To help my society put away the complexes of the years of self-denigration and self-abasement. To help my society put away the complexes of the years of denigration and self-abasement. As I talked about a kind of self-inflicted hatred arising from racism, where you turn out to hate yourself because the hate comes from outside. You now project it to yourself. Here then is an adequate revolution for me to espouse, to help my society put away the years of self-denigration and self-abasement, the complexes of the years of self-denigration and self-abasement. Self-denigration, self-abasement. Okay? So in all that Achebe has written, Things Fall Apart, For instance, if you look at Things Fall Apart, Things Fall Apart has two historical periods. All right? You have the pre-colonial period at the beginning, and towards the end you have the colonial period, when the colonial masters arrive. So the novel is written as a response to what? To history. Things Fall Apart is written as a response to history, historical event. So history is very central to the understanding of post-colonial literature. History is very central to the understanding of post-colonial literature. History is very central to the understanding of post-colonial literature. You cannot study post-colonial literature without partnering with history. Okay? Because post-colonial literature is mostly the fictionalization of history. It's mostly the what? The fictionalization of history. Post-colonial literature is the fictionalization of history. History and fiction. So this is why Achebe says in another quote, in the same essay, the novelist as teacher, and I wanted to take down the quote. I would be satisfied if my novels, especially those I set in the past, I would be satisfied if my novels, especially those I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers. I would be satisfied if my novels, especially those I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, let's use past, that past with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery. That the past with all its imperfections was not one long night of savagery, from which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. Unquote. I will be satisfied if my novels, especially those I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, with all its imperfection, was not one long night of savagery, from which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. Unquote. I will be quite satisfied if my novels, especially those I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery, from which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. Unquote. What Achebe said. From which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. So the narrative out there has been that the Europeans came to deliver Africans from darkness. All right? From a long night of savagery. So they simply call our pre-colonial history a long night of darkness and savagery. That's how Europeans view our pre-colonial history. There was no light because there was no civilization. Civilization in terms of how they view civilization. All right? So they simply say that it was a long night of savagery and that they came to save us, all right, from darkness. They brought light, okay? So Achebe is saying that in my novels, I want you to understand that your past was not full of darkness. It must have had its own imperfections, right? After all, the Europeans also had their own imperfections. The Europeans were also primitive. They also lived in caves, all right? But they didn't call themselves primitive. Most of them still practice their culture, indigenous culture still today. But they didn't call themselves primitive, so why did they call us? When we were also developing even ahead of them. All right? And so they came and said that our past, we didn't have civilization. So that's what Achebe is saying. So when we are studying the pre-colonial novel, we are looking at history before the colonial masters came. And in interrogating that history, we want to counter the colonialist ideology. So when we come back to look at the African novel again, we'll look at how that history works, how that history operates in the novel, in the pre-colonial novel. Because the pre-colonial novel is the pre-colonial novel is a misnomer. The term pre-colonial novel is what? It's a misnomer. Right? It has to be defined in order to be understood. It has to be defined in order to be understood. The reason is this. Let me just give you a hint. The reason is this. The novel itself, as we know it, all right, was written in the colonial period, right? No, it was in the colonial period. So do we have a pre-colonial novel? We couldn't have a pre-colonial novel that was in the pre-colonial period. That's why it becomes murky. The waters of criticism becomes murky. And we want to talk about the pre-colonial novel. All right? So it's like a form of recollection, a rememory. When all around you was colonialism, and you try to put back pieces of the past together just to present to the white man and say, this is what it was like before you came. So we don't really have a pre-colonial novel that was written before colonial masters came. It's more or less a recollection, trying to put the piece of our life back together. A recall, all right? Recollection, remember. All right, so that's where we end our class for the African novel today. We're going to switch. We're going to switch to 7. If you are ready to go. You can take a break then.